Gabon guztioi eta beste behin ongi etorri Gutun Zurira. Buenas.
Good evening once again and welcome to Gutun Zuria. Today we have a great singer and, as she says, a multidisciplinary artist, Christina Rosenvinge and Chico y Chica, this musical duo from Bilbao made up of José Luis Rebollo and Alicia San Juan. Thank you all very much and welcome, and we'll welcome them with a strong round of applause.
Buenas noches. Muchas gracias.
Good evening. Thank you all very much. Christina Rosenvinge presents a book with 11 autobiographical episodes, lyrics from her songs, and an essay on how to link words to music. A book that reflects on love, fear, art, maturity and freedom in her songs. Christina, welcome. Good evening. Thank you very much. For me, it's a real honor to be here with this book. This week, Rafael Sánchez Ferloso passed away, and I saw a bit of an interview. I think it was the last one he did for ABC, and I was delighted, and I thought I'd use this to kick off this conversation. He was asked if he would ever write his memoirs, and he answered, no, never. How could I write my memoirs if I'm only ashamed of my past until yesterday? Have you felt embarrassed writing this book? What did it feel like? Well, I'd done quite a lot of work on embarrassment because in my songs I already expose a lot of my intimacy. So putting it on paper was just taking it a step further. And while a writer is hidden behind an invented story, what I've done during my whole career has always been based on my own experience. But it is true that we use our own material because it's at hand most of the time. It's not so much a matter of narcissism or of focusing on yourself. And I was explaining something that happened to me a couple of days ago that I found very amusing. I was promoting this book, and a young journalist, he didn't exactly use these words, but that was the meaning, and I thought it was wonderful because he asked me quite openly, you've written 10 records about your life, and now you've written a book. Do you really think you're such a fascinating person? And I thought it was a very impertinent and a very funny question, and I was surprised that nobody had asked it before. And I said, thanks for the question. I think it's great. And I'll tell you why this is done this way. Well, in the same way that the first thing that Van Gogh did when he started to paint portraits was to sit in front of a mirror and paint himself. Self-portraits in painting is a very widely extended resource. What we do in music is the same. It's not that you find yourself fascinating, that you think your face is fascinating, but you just happen to be there. Who's going to be your model? Who's going to sit in front of you for 3 hours? Well, it's the same for me. If I have to talk about a life and bring out the worst parts of it, it's better to do it with mine than with somebody else's who could get upset. So through my own experiences, I really talk about everybody's experiences because we basically all go through the same things. And that's the reason for this kind of self-reference, which isn't that autobiographical. There's a lot of the first person, but it's not that real. And in this exercise of remembering, of rebuilding things you've already experienced, have you felt that blurred line between what one remembers and what actually happened? Of course. And this is a fabulous discovery, because when you're doing it in a song, you're sublimating it, obviously. But when you use your own diaries, or you're talking about things you've experienced that you have a very clear memory of course you face the issue that when you put your experience or what you remember in writing and how you choose to do it, because you don't just download it, you choose a literary style to write it. There are things you leave out, there are things that you enhance, and as soon as you write, you're creating fiction. In other words, it's not the truth. The truth doesn't exist. You're writing a version of what happened according your sensitivity today. And in fact, there's no way of doing it differently. And in the chapters, for example, where I'm 26, with everything that being 26 means, a certain naivety, arrogance, all this, I didn't want to remove this. I tried to be loyal to the style I had then. Were you used to writing diaries? You wrote a diary, so you have the notes and you've reviewed them, you've looked back. Yes, I'm a bit, well, let's see. I'm not tidy about it, but I have files, boxes. I keep everything. I never throw anything away. So I write a draft for a song and it ends up in a box. It's all very unorganized. And in my house, I always thought that Maricondo should come in and make it all look marvelous. But look what's happened. Thanks to that, I've been to dive into it and find my diary for 1994. And the diaries are very funny, because they're always written at times of desperation. If everything's fine, if I'm having a great time, I don't write anything. I just pick up my guitar and have a great time. But at times of rest is when I write. So people that read my diary, people would think that my life was a lot unhappier than it actually is. And when did you start to collect all this material, to compile the material? Well, the story behind this book, it all started because when I finished my last record, when I was finishing the lyrics, I knew I wanted to publish all my lyrics together because it makes sense to do it now. I'm a lyrics collector, and I have a lot of written lyrics. And right now there are lots of people that listen to the music without having the CD or a vinyl record, and they don't read them. And I find on Twitter lyrics taken out of my songs that have been reproduced incorrectly. So I wanted to give them a hard cover and defend my lyrics as a literary genre with all its dignity. And I had also got into the mess of writing an essay where I more or less describe the technique of writing the sung verse, which is very different to the written verse. Because when you write what you're going to sing, the sonority of the words is almost more important than the meaning. And you have the rhythm, the metric, and you write over a melody that already has a significant emotional burden. The melody line is already telling a story, and the lyrics have to supplement that, but you have to be very careful not to flatten the melody with lyrics that are too heavy, for example. So it's a very refined technique. And I felt like doing this work because after looking for several years, I couldn't find an essay or a theory on how singing is related to lyrics, to music, beat, etc. So I've laid the first stone. The essay had many more pages. I thought it was too dense, and I cut it down. But I think I've laid the first foundation stone that can be built upon. And after doing this, no publishing firm wanted it because they wanted new material. They wanted poetry or stories or memoirs. And I was insistent on vindicating my 26 years as a lyrics writer, especially since I started my solo career. And I was lucky enough that one night I met Belén Copegui. I said I was looking for a publisher, and Belén put me in touch with Carlos López La Madrid, a publisher at Random House, who phoned me up the next day very insulted because I hadn't offered him the songbook as it was then, because I knew him, but I didn't think it was a project for him because it wasn't narrative. And he phoned me up, we had lunch together, and he said that he wanted some introductory text for each song. And that was between 100 and 150. Finally, it's 107 because I haven't included the songs that weren't published in the albums. And that's impossible to read. So what I'm going to do is to integrate all that introductory text, let's say, in a narrative on each record. So my aim was to have the essay, which explains why this is so difficult, then the lyrics, and this appendix with the explanations. And when I gave it to him, I started to send him chapters. He was very enthusiastic. He said, I'm enjoying this, write more, it's fantastic. And I said, as a publisher, I hope you'll give me more guidance. This is new to me. No, you carry on. I'm having a great time. And it started to grow, and then I suddenly found 160 pages of memories from my diaries, and his great contribution as a publisher was to change the order. He interjected the chapters with the lyrics, and in that case, it's a sort of literary artifact, as I call it now. I like the term. It sounds as if it's going to blow up. And it creates a story. And this can be read not because it's my life and it's fascinating, but because it's the experience of somebody that writes songs. And it explains what happens to you, what you learn, what you reflect on, the news you read, and how you take all that into the lyrics of the songs. And that's what this is. I get the impression that right now you're where you want to be, but in the book you can see that often you've made decisions that not everybody liked. Were you weaving in and out, or now when you've written this book and perhaps the pieces start to fit? That's part of the reason, because I've heard this before, that my career had wandered about, or that I'd reinvented myself, as if people find it difficult to connect the dots. And I always said it's these circumstances, and it's the time I'm living. There's really no pretense of making sudden changes. For me, there's a narrative that makes a lot of sense, and that's also the reason why I wanted to put all this in order. And writing has been a therapy for me, because it's always a bit traumatic, and yet it's been very pleasant. It's been very nice, and I've realized that my life has been much more fun and interesting than I remember. In this book, you talk about the profession of being an artist, and you ask yourself a lot of existential and very timely questions. And I'd like to read some of them. There are a lot. Can I read them all? Okay. Well, you say in one of the paragraphs in your book about the profession, you say, in this profession, you spend a lot of time getting ready for something that may never come. Does it make sense to dedicate yourself, body and soul, to something that doesn't put food on the table? Why do you insist on writing a song that nobody asks you to do? For pleasure? For recognition? What is the social function of artists? If your work doesn't produce economic income, can it be considered a job? If it's profitable, is it still art? I don't know. These are questions that you still ask yourself. Yes, for me, that part, in fact, is important, because it's what we in this profession face, and we're the first to question it. both our legitimacy and the usefulness of doing it. And these are questions one constantly asks oneself. And you're actually doing it because you can't avoid doing it. The real reason is you can't avoid doing it. Your way of living is conveying what you see into a musical form. But it's not a very practical decision, you know. As a life strategy, it's really not the best, but you can't help doing it. It's a vocation, let's say. Where do the melodies come from? I mean, there are times that there are phrases that are begging to be sung. Do you remember a time when a melody has occurred to you at a particularly strange moment? Yes, most songs find you at work. You also write songs and you know what it's like. You work a certain number of hours per day and you're playing around with the chords, because I think that the most effective way of writing songs is starting with the music and not with the lyrics, because you already have a dramatic approach before you start to write. But when you're looking, often you don't find it. But then that part of your brain has been activated, and when you're doing something else, all of a sudden the melody comes at you. And this is one of the things I've tried to describe in the book in one of the chapters. Yes, well, this is when, after doing Cerrado, a record that didn't have much of a repercussion, bad reviews, and a very short tour, and I felt at a dead end, and a short time later I had a baby, and I was on holiday at my mother's house, and it was a time of crisis where reason tells me that I should give up music, and this is what happened. That afternoon I didn't go to the beach. I'm dozing in the yellow room in my mother's house when a melody appears. I ignore it and I continue to try to fall asleep. I have to get my energy up for the evening, and I suddenly find an irregular tune that is very playful. Silence, I wait, and it comes back to my ear like a fly. Leave me alone, fly. Can't you see I need to sleep? The fly lands on my forehead, rubs its legs, and goes back to that irregular beat. That's the song. Is there no compassion in this world? I can't stand it anymore. Fly, shut up. There are more important things than you and your music. See the towel on the floor, Fly? I'm now a cow, a happy cow with a happy calf by my side. Nobody's going to miss me or my songs because I'm not presentable. I don't even have time to have a shower. My belly looks like wrinkled paper, like an empty wrapping, too much skin that never shrinks back. I'll never be able to swim naked again with this enormous scar. That's the end to bikinis, but what does it matter? Now I have a baby, and I have to produce more than 2 liters of delicious milk a day, and that's real talent. I'm a very, very happy and boring cow that doesn't records records. So fuck off, fly. The fly flies off for a little bit, but comes back again and again and again. And there, the paragraph ends. It's an enumeration. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a list. What does it want to count? I'm exhausted. I get up and pick up a Spanish guitar to pick out the chords that I think I need, which is a la bossa nova baby. The numbering leads to a lot of nonsense. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I only want to sleep. What a bothersome fly. I close my eyes. Come back, my dear. We miss you, I hear on the other side. A few days later, I'm doing a recipe with my mother's instructions, a quarter of a kilo of meat, egg, flour, salt, and I put it in the refrigerator for half an hour and mix it all up properly, and it's fried with plenty of butter. And these are Danish meatballs, if you're curious. when the phone rings and my mother answers, hello, and suddenly she starts to speak in English. And she's talking to somebody she's never met and who turns out to be Steve Shelley. Hello, Aaliyah gave me your name. Would you like to do a gig here in New York? We can play with you, me and my band. Do you have any more songs in English like the two we recorded? If you want to make a record, I could put it out on my label. Are you planning another trip to New York? A short silence. I had left music then, and I hear myself saying, of course, I have a bunch of songs that are almost finished. Of course, I want to go back to New York. I'd love to play at the Tonic. I want to start the 21st century playing New York. And the fly starts to loop the loop, and as if it was high. There's no way of stopping the mental insects that multiplies into 1,000 possible melodies. The buzzing invades my head, fills the house and the garden. It goes through a neighbor's window, leaving him amazed, and goes into a forest where a deer raises an ear and makes the windows vibrate with a small seismic movement, and is amplified beyond the lighthouse, where the waves of the Baltic Sea and the North Sea challenge itself from afar and move forward like the armies of Rome and Carthage until they clash against each other, raising up frocks of foam like ballerinas. I'm back, I'm back, I'm back.
Que la mosca.
The fly, the inspirational fly. It's not the first time. It's another character in the stories you tell us. Well, we've spoken a lot about the images that Christina creates in the book. There's the fly, but there's also a favorite of yours, the frocks, yes, the can-can frocks. This is at the tip of Denmark, where my mother has a little cabin. It's our village, let's say, when we go on holiday. And there's a magic place, the tip of Denmark, where the North Sea and the Atlantic come together and they crash against each other. And you can see the waves crashing and the streams are brutal. The currents are brutal. Well, you have a very active mind, Christina. You're thinking non-stop, imagining things. Do you ever rest? Well, the difficult thing is to organize your thoughts, to focus it on a specific point. Because in another part of the book, I make a confession. I have an attention deficit, but 80% of artists have. And this leads to a very wild way of thinking, where you don't always go in the same direction. You go in many different directions, and you need to have the discipline of thinking in a single direction, so all that mental activity will be put into something you can touch. And that's what I found it hardest to acquire in time, to make that muddle of disorganized thoughts productive. I remember that some months ago I read a little interview in one of these Sunday papers, and they asked several artists from that generation, the end of the 80s, which is when you started, and they asked, when you were 15, you were already on a stage. What would you say to that girl now? And you answered, I would tell her not to sell her vinyl records, to not sign contracts with a good lawyer, to learn the theory of music, and above all, don't worry so much, everything will work out. And then I see that in the book, you refer a lot to fear. Do you still have that fear, or what would your fear be as a professional, as a person, or as a musician? Well, this artifact are neither memoirs or a diary, and it's really an idyll with music over many years. It's a romance. And I considered what I should write and what I shouldn't. And I realized that many artists, when they write their books, they talk about glamour, the glamorous side, who you met last night, and I don't know what happened, and you give a lot of names and try to appropriate their artistic aura. And I thought that was a bit dishonest. And I felt that I needed to talk about something that nobody talks about, what's behind the glamour, the spotlight, and the stage. That's fear, terror, failure, because everything that's worthwhile in life comes from a failure. And talking about breaking that cliche where when we're given interviews we say that everything's going great. And everything's going great all the time. And nobody says, well, it's been hell to make this record, or I can't get on with the people in my band, or I've been cheated and embezzled. It's like Instagram. Everybody sells their happy side, and you don't talk to people when you're a sea of doubts. And since that's precisely when you write songs, I thought it would be valuable to confess it, because everybody goes through that and nobody talks about it. But yet you don't transmit that fear. As you read the book, you're non-stop. You keep going, and you don't feel that fear, although you recognize that you felt fear. Well, I have to say that if I was able to have an artistic career, it's because I've been privileged. I come from a privileged family, and certain things were secure. And I always say this, although it's like throwing stones at my own roof, but there's a lot of wasted talent in people that can't afford the luxury to do this. I was lucky enough to make a lot of money at the beginning of my career, and I had savings that made me free. Well, everything I made at the beginning, I put in a little house, and I was the owner, and I had a family that when I was down to zero, they gave me their support. And I always say this because I think that there has to be a structure that can back people that aren't lucky enough. Music can't be a privilege of the middle class. And on the other hand, it hasn't been so much because of bravery, but because the options they gave me weren't good enough. The option of becoming a sort of replacement for Meccano didn't fit. I wouldn't know how to do that. I wouldn't have any faith in it. So I didn't get involved in that because I was sure that there would be something good coming along. And it's not that I wasn't afraid of failure. I thought I wasn't going to fail. I thought it was going to work out. And often it's worked out wrong. But the lesson is that by following your instinct and by having faith in what you believe in, you get there. And I think it's good to pass on this experience.
There's an episode I really like in the book that made me really laugh. It's about the clowns, where we really see all those miseries that we can find in the industry of the record industry. Yes, in the beginning, I talked more about the odyssey of the contracts, but then I removed that because I thought that, money is filthy, so I'd rather don't have it here, and I removed it. And there are a couple of stories that I told because people think that this is an easy life. You get records. They don't think you've got to look for the funding for every project, or, like the record I recorded in New York, my first record, was about now to be published because there was a personal story of revenge that got in the middle, and I also told that in the book. And then I go to New York. I'm going to record my first record in a very well-known studio in Hoboken, and I go visit it with my book. There is a wonderful recording table, and two of my bands, Luna y Yo La Tengo, they were recording there, but it's quite peculiar, not because it is a semi-inhabited Hoboken building, but because of all the clowns in all the shelves and walls. These are part of Jean's, the sound engineer collection. And he's got a very peculiar velvet voice. And then he turns to be visible with a smile like the cat in Alice in Wonderland. So who will collect all these clowns? So this is what Tim and myself, my guitar player and me, we would wonder. And then Jean goes towards the kitchen to prepare a welcome coffee for us. So then we sat, we drive, we wrote the schedule, the perfect plan for recording, and then I would then record my voices and my guitars. But Jean is Janet's boyfriend, and she's the bass player. So when Janet is on the road, Jean, he reveals himself as a seducer. So when we start recording a voice, he starts flattering me with this velvet voice. So singers are especially vulnerable when we are singing, and he knows it perfectly well. So since I don't pay attention, he goes again to the exquisite professional treatment. So Lee comes to record some of the choirs and the guitars and to correct my accent. And I don't try to be any stronger than I am. And I sort of walk in a wire to concentrate if what I've got in front of my feet, not underneath or behind, and my body's recovering its shape and not its strength. I could even look nice in a strass bikini in my daily acrobacies. In the last days of the recording, Gina starts getting late and he shows some lack of interest. He goes to the window, he talks on the telephone, and when the band comes back, Janet tells me, very sad, that Jean and Steve's girlfriends, they got together while she was away. I said that somebody collecting clowns is not somebody normal. So there is a huge crisis under this circus tent, and Janet and Steve, they face Jean, the clown that says he didn't throw any knives to anybody at all, and Tim, he's on command because he's the oldest one. And then I am there paralyzed with the trapeze in my hand, and Jean says, let's not get personal lives and professional things together. He says, let's keep on recording as scheduled. We all said no, and then his smile disappears, and then he gets very, very angry. We all sort of pull back. Even Tim, he's no longer in command, and we all run down the stairs, and then we look at each other before we separate from each other, end of the function. And I go back home, and then Jean calls me that night, to my surprise, because I didn't say anything. He decided to hijack my master. What the hell? These are 3 weeks' work, and he says, I'm going to delete this if you do not fulfill some conditions that I do not understand. When he is shouting at me, I say, could you please speak slower? And he's like, are you supporting Steve? Well, of course, you fucking asshole. So the master was kind of hijacked for some bounce, and my work was about to disappear, but luckily, well, things sort of got sorted out in a right way, and we could publish it. Well, yes, writing some memoirs is talking about some people's life, the people that you've encountered, like Gina and his clowns. But then there are also people that are closer to you that also appear in the book. And I don't know, can you share with us how did you manage talking about your own life, but also talking about somebody else's lives and the people like sort of come in and out of your life? Well, some people appear in the songs and I never ask them for permission. And if they don't like it, well, to hell with them. And when there's this poetical license in a way, so this is subjective, everybody knows about it. But when you write these stories beyond the song about some people or on some people, then I had this moral dilemma, because it might sort of put into pieces my own privacy and intimacy, but I don't know whether I can do that with somebody else's. So that was an issue. And then Jean, I didn't ask him permission, and I don't think this is going to ever published in English. He would never know about this. But Steve, since I am talking, when he got through with his girlfriend, and I asked him whether I could talk about it. So those that were directly implied in the story, if this belonged to their privacy, then I request them for their permission. I ask them for their permission because, you know, often some people write literature in this way, and many people get angry, but it is unfair because when you write about somebody, then that is the version of that person that you write about, and there it remains forever. But you've been very careful. Yes, I've been very careful because this is almost like a personal diary, and well, when I talked about my family, I had my mom's and my brother's permission, and they all said okay. And my mom is the only one that she corrected me, and this is very interesting because I could perfectly well remember my mom walking out the door. They were going to attend the gypsy wedding. My mom is from Baileys, and we're in Denmark, and I could remember that perfectly well. And she was there, like wearing this Spanish hair comb, and she said everything is perfect, but I've never ever in my life wore a Spanish hand comb, and then I had to remove it because either she forgot it or maybe I made it up. Or maybe you made it up. I don't know whether this ornamental comb existed or not, but you know, memory is subjective. And she said, no, I never had one. This is why visual testimonies are not really taken into account in court, because memory is creative. When you leave New York, this is after the Twin Towers. Maybe New York became more hostile, and then you come back to Spain, and you write some thoughts about the indie scenario, and you said, well, this is like a schoolyard, because it seems like boys did not accept that women are doing what they do. Do you think this was kind of macho attitude? You were coming from a place maybe where they would have loved to be. You were working with Sonny Jude. Maybe they would have loved to work with them. Well, I suffered from prejudices a lot because my evolution was very unusual. I came out of underground, then I went mainstream, then I got the emergency exit, and I've been changing a lot. And usually people don't follow that path. And on the one hand, we've got the prejudices on the authenticity, style, purity, and this is combined with sexist prejudices. Because when you're a woman in a man's world, that also means you've got to face many archetypes that you've got to break. And to me, when I was living in New York among bands, and I don't say they don't have this attitude, but there are many women in their bands. But when I came back to Spain, 98% in the bands were men. So to me, this was shocking to come back to this situation and with all these prejudices, and to read, after I did Verano Fatal, to read the reviews saying that Nacho was the author of my lyrics. I mean, I said, like, I am still here trying to prove who I am. And, well, this was shocking. Yeah, it was a shock. And I don't think I've won this battle. I am still an artist in the edges. I'm not sort of the one to appear in every festival. I don't usually attend festivals. Sometimes I attend some festivals like the Pazo Zuria. I'm going to be there with an Ari. I love it. And I usually attend the Primavera Sound because they are with my record. But I think that I am a weirdo, and maybe my audience is made of a legion of weirdos. So maybe we don't need anybody else. You also say in the book that you've been accused of perpetuating romantic love. Some time ago, it was with Juan Manuel de Prada, and his last novel, Lucía en la Noche, Lucía in the Night, is a thriller, but it's basically a love story. And there he was quoting Ramón Gómez de la Serna, when he explained that, well, facing this, like doing a romantic novel, you've got to be courageous. So he was quoting Ramón de la Serna that used to say, well, you know, it's what's kind of not very chic. It's sometimes very homey. I mean, things that are not very nice or not very tasteful are nevertheless very sort of cozy. So if that was accepted and more like all over, I think human beings will be more discreet, more elegant.
Sí, porque además lo cursi se ha asociado a lo femenino y a mí tengo muchísimo interés en las.
Well, I really like it because, you know, sometimes this is related to ladies, and I think sometimes being affected and not doing things with very good taste, or when you are very shishy or fussy, then you always relate this to a female attitude, to a fragile presence, and it seems like you cannot have a good discourse if you look like that. And recently, Patti Smith, she was the first woman that was also accepted by our establishment, also because he is more like masculinized. And maybe we've got to review what is feminine, what is masculine, and what is genuine, and what is simply like a Trojan horse, because you just like sort of wear a mask. So they let you in, they let you into this scene. If you've got to record and to record your songs, maybe you've got to be on a stage in your undies. Why not? Well, you want to be there, so you do whatever. So sometimes we say whatever, we go for it. So sometimes we've followed some strategies that there weren't questioned, but then you say, well, if you don't play with those tools, you don't really get in there. So I've got to get in there anyhow. So I think everything has to be seen within a context, not as a dogma. So yes, maybe what is sort of fussy might be also cozy. Yes, these love songs or about breakthroughs, idealizing love. I think I always say that there is not a conflict and there's not a story. If you have a beautiful relationship with a wonderful man and everything is okay, then you don't have a story, you don't have a song. So for you to write, something has to be odd, or you've got to break his heart, or him break your heart. Otherwise, you don't have a story. When you do your album, The Young Dolores, La Joven Dolores, maybe then the subject changes. It's like a tipping point. And then it goes on up until now with the blonde man, un hombre rubio. Maybe now this is the idea of the universal man. Yes, that's it. Joven Dolores is when I tell myself I'm not going to be writing songs in such an instinctive way. So this is about feminine myths, female myths. And that was my pretext to think about classical women, like Lot's woman or wife, and about Eve. And I'm going to read about Eve. She's not the first woman in history. She does not obey the creator. Maybe the apple was really fresh and nice, but maybe she doesn't want to pay attention to orders that she doesn't like. Don't eat that apple, don't look back, don't tie your shoes, don't touch your nose, don't, I mean, objectively, you cannot take this as serious as don't kill, love the others, things that were really basic and that were a revolutionary contribution for human beings to live peacefully. Well, anyway, the fact that Eve didn't obey, this was very bad for all of us, because we are then delivering babies in pain, and if Eve would come back to this world, she would be really shocked, because her bad reputation is still there. If she would bump into Adam again, she would say, I'd rather avoid you, because last time we got into a great mess. So this has been told to us since the beginning of time. So when a woman makes her own decision, this is the beginning of the chaos. But she was not the first femme fatale. And we see the mermaids that take Ulysses in the book. And the sailors, they don't pay attention, and they rode through troubled waters. They're described as weird creatures that look like half a woman, half a bird. And well, this fish tail only appears in a later time. Maybe they are girls that learn to breathe underwater after their impossible relationship with an adventurer went into a wreckage, and Penelope would cheat. Penelope would
perfectamente entendible cierto rencor, hasta un más que justo.
Well, all these heroes were cheating on Penelope and on these other heroes. And I wish I could take any lover with me, especially that silly one that was having the siesta, and that was Nacho, by the way. So I just throw choirs to his head, and then he sends them back to me overloaded. I would like to become a femme fatale. And then the result is a song that I especially like. I am very proud of it, because here I link 3 consonant rhymes, and the last one is the word semen. This is why she's going to read this song, and this wasn't easy, but it's not going to rhyme in English, so we save you from here, from this.
Parece que duerme, ya puedo romperme, no tendrás que quererme, dice, yo te querré a ti. No hay divinas señales, solo 2 animales en posturas anormales para deshacer los enredos, las venas, los tendones, cadenas que atan la pena de lo que no es. ¿Qué brilla en la oscuridad? El aliento contenido desde la pubertad, el impulso impreciso que se tiene a esa edad. Con la piel bendecida, él dice, mi vida es pequeña la herida, casi no se ve. El árbol florece, otra manzana crece, ya sé lo que parece, pero no lo es. Ni comen, ni beben, aún no se atreven, no saben que tienen ya su cacho de Edén, qué es lo que temen, una gota de semen hará que se quemen siglos de fe. ¿Qué brilla en la oscuridad? El aliento contenido desde la pubertad, el impulso impreciso que se tiene a esa edad. Si la luz miente, es que esto será la verdad.
Qué bonita. Sí. Es que estamos ya ves que estamos.
Really beautiful. Well, we are in the countdown. We still have some time though. And José Luis said about Joven Dolores, that was a tipping point in your career. And I think we've already mentioned that these. You're not afraid of starting all over again, you're not afraid of tipping point. In fact, the title of this book is Debut, or Start. I think you like to be starting constantly, debuting constantly. Well, yes, debut was the trite of one of the songs in the Jóvenes Dolores record. Yes, there were many titles, and this is the one that Claudia liked most. And then I gave up, first for this feeling that I always have this impression that I am debuting something and getting into messes that I cannot really handle, like writing a book. But that's what makes it fun. And also because I think this was kind of a challenge. Well, yes, 54 years, and I'm 54 years old, and I am starting all over again. This is like very much like people from Bilbao. They say like, let's go for it, whatever. You know, if somebody can do it, I can do it. So Christina is going to play in Bilbao in April 26th. Yes, this is like the starters. Yes, this is my new record, Un Hombre Rubio. I tried to get in my father's skin. He was a very difficult father. I had a very difficult relationship with him, and I had to sort of reconcile with his souvenir. It took me many years, and this led to a whole story. And there I combined an artistical performance with this tale, this sort of storytelling of the whole adventure. And then you always think that your own experience would be good for somebody else. So the good thing is when people sort of say, yes, we share things, and I am sort of, yes, adding words to what happens to everybody else's. Well, okay. So now the audience has the possibility to also ask thanks to Christina.
Pues nada, quien quiera arrancarse a preguntar algo, puede hacerlo libremente.
So please feel free to make questions.
Sí.
A ver.
Este siempre es un momento un poco tenso porque hay gente que quiere preguntar.
Somebody would like to make questions, but they don't dare. And then they will approach me later and say, I wanted to ask you this, but then they don't do it. You can also make rude questions. I don't care. In your book, you say there is a moment when you have to go and play on your own. And then you realize that playing on your own means that people don't pay that much attention on whether you're playing well or not, and they pay more attention to songs. Yes, when people say I am a singer, I have an issue, because if I was only a singer, I would not be here. I became a singer in order to be able to write lyrics and to then sing them. And then I learned to compose, to use the musical language, and then to play piano. It was all like part of the same thing. All of it was part of the same thing. So my tool is music, and I use music. But behind that, there are many disciplines that are interlinked and interconnected. And I more and more see music as something where everything has to sort of crisscross, and everything is interconnected. And you have to produce everything that happens in the world. That is pop music. So you say what's happening in the world, you convey a feeling, and then you add a choir to it. And I think this is very powerful as a way of popular expression. And I think this happens in none of the other high disciplines of culture. So to me, this is of high value. Well, it's very good that nobody wants to make questions in the audience, because then we can sort of keep on asking things that we wanted to ask you.
Something else that's in the book, there are two ways of surviving in the world of art: doing the same as others but doing it better, or doing something that only you know how to do. Could you give us an example that fits in either of these two categories? Well, it's difficult. Aretha Franklin, for example, perhaps isn't inventing anything, although it would be debatable, but undoubtedly she's the best at that. It's a lot of people were doing then, but she did it better than anybody. So I think that when you look for your place, a way of getting in, you have these two pathways. Either you're canonical purist and do it better than anybody because you're extremely gifted, or you invent your own style. And the kind of artists I've always liked best are those that stem from their limitations. And somebody that doesn't have a great voice. But the people I like don't have a great voice either. I like Lou Reed, who semi-talks through the songs. So the kind of artists I like are those that arise from a limitation. They've always inspired me more. The others are superhuman, divine, and are nothing like me. So they haven't been the ones I've followed. Can I ask some more questions? Of course. Well, I think we've run out of time. But I would like to ask, what did your parents think about you becoming an artist? No, answer José Luis first. What did my parents think about you becoming an artist? Did they establish any limitations? They didn't understand it, although my father's very fond of flamenco and poetry. He was an engineer and he came from a privileged family, and he couldn't even consider that one of his children would do that. It seemed terrible to him, and to my mother it seemed extremely dangerous. And in fact, when I started to sing in a band at 15 and the kids went to meet my mother wanted to see who they were. And when they left, she said, the place you're going to play, once the concert is over, do you have to go out with the audience? And after the years, I thought, what kind of place did you go to when you went out? Because that's the question. Where did you go? What dumps did you go to? Well, now we are going to move on to the question from the audience. Hello, good evening, over here. Thank you very much. Can you turn the lights up a bit? When you put out a new record, how do you make the changes? In your previous record, Lo Nuestro, I think it's an extremely radical change. I found it hard at the beginning, but after listening to a lot, I ended up liking it. But I have to admit that I thought it was an extremely radical change at the beginning. So what do you go by to make those changes? Often it's a matter of playing about with the circumstances and the tools you have available at that point. When I recorded Lo Nuestro, I wanted to record in Spain, and I was working with Refri, and there was the opportunity of recording in his studio. We were going to record it together, and it was the first record I recorded without a band. We didn't prepare a band together. So I wrote the song, then we had a bass, and I sort of made up the song piece by piece, which is how he does it. But in any case, the problem you have with Lo Nuestro is a problem I have too. It's a record I love to play live, but when I listen to the record, I think it's a bit cold. So I feel like re-recording those songs in a warmer version, let's say. But I don't know, there are on the other hand, there are songs like La Minguta where I think that the method worked very well. So it also has to do with experimenting and playing with what you have at hand. I had a small budget, and Refri, who was dying to make a record, so we said, let's go ahead. And it's the first record I recorded with programming, and now I handle that fairly well. But if you come to the concert in Basauri, you'll see that those records live become fabulous. They're really good. Hello, Christina. I wanted to ask, whether you're satisfied with your creation at this point, or whether you still have the feeling that you still haven't given birth to something you still have inside of you. It's a good question. I think that when you start to feel self-complacent, you're finished. No, you do it while you do it. You try to give it all. And once you've done it, you leave it in the corner and you say, well, that wasn't bad, but I'm going to start working on the next one, see if I can do a better job. I have the feeling that there are things that work out very well, others that I could go back to and make them better now, and others where I think that I shouldn't be so rigid and I ought to enjoy imperfection more. But it's also true that constant restlessness and thinking that I can go further is what keeps me alive, and that's why I don't live off successes from the past, and why don't I repeat what I've already done. But the world changes very quickly, and things quickly lose their meaning. So we have to take the temperature of the world and consider what you can contribute and how you can use that in your favor. Basically, music and literature is a dialogue with the present time. It's not so much a personal work, I don't know how to say it. You quickly want to do something else. If there's one final question, perfect. And if not, yes, I'm not sure. No. Well, we'll leave it here. Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you, Christina. Thank you.
Vale, y recordar que la...
And remember, the concert is on April 26th. You'll be back to Bilbao soon. Thank you. Good night.